When the monitors beeped and the hospital lights blurred above me, I thought my son would come running. Instead, he stayed home, smiling in a family photo with his wife and child at my dining table my husband and I had bought together, the table where I once carved Thanksgiving turkeys. And the caption, "Finally, a day without the drama queen." As I lay strapped to wires and IVs, my absence wasn't mourned, it was celebrated. That moment ripped away every illusion I had about loyalty, about blood ties, about love. What followed was a betrayal so cold, so calculated, it could have cost me not just my home, but my sanity, my freedom, and even custody of my granddaughter. If you think you know betrayal, think again. Stay with me as I reveal every hidden detail. Do not forget to subscribe to Silent Lies right now. The first sign that my body was finished carrying the weight of silence came not at home, not in bed, but under the harsh flicker of fluorescent hospital lights. The buzzing above me felt like an angry swarm, as if the very air conspired to mock me while nurses hurried to stabilize my pulse. Heart palpitations, they called it. Stress-induced. At 63, my body had finally rebelled against the endless charade that everything was fine. As I lay there strapped to wires, I told myself that my son would be on his way, that David would burst through those sliding glass doors, frantic, shaken, desperate to be near me. I was wrong. The hospital staff had called him. He knew. And yet when my phone buzzed with a notification, it was not his voice or his message. It was Melissa, my daughter-in-law, tagging me in a photo. How thoughtful, I thought in a moment of naive hope. Perhaps a kind note of concern, perhaps words of support. I tapped the screen and froze. There it was. My dining table, the one Tom and I had bought together when we were newly married and living off coupons and hand-me-down furniture. David sat at the head, smiling as if the house and the table had always been his. Melissa glowed in the chair that used to be mine, and little Chloe laughed at something outside the frame. They looked happy, too happy. They were in my house, eating my food, living my life. The caption clawed at my chest worse than the palpitations. Finally, a day without the drama queen. Family dinner is so much more peaceful. The comments piled in. My sister-in-law Nancy had even responded with laughing emojis, a digital applause to my erasure. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, until my throat burned from holding back a scream. I was in a hospital bed, alone, while the family I had given everything to celebrated my absence. The nurse returned with paperwork and asked if my son was coming to pick me up. I checked the timestamp of Melissa's post. 20 minutes earlier exactly, when the hospital would have called David. He had chosen a staged photograph over his mother's hospital bed. Something inside me broke and hardened at the same time. I smiled at the nurse, steady, unshaken on the outside. "I will call a taxi," I said. And I did. But I also made another call, one I had avoided for 3 years. Barbara, my real estate agent, answered with the brisk tone of someone who never wasted time. "Remember that house on Maple Street?" I asked. "The one you said would sell in a week? I am ready to list it." It might seem drastic, but by then it was the only path left. To understand how I ended up sitting in a hospital lobby dialing Barbara, you have to go back to the day everything started unraveling. It was the day I buried Tom, my husband of 35 years. His death left me with a house full of memories, a life insurance policy, and savings that were meant to cushion my future. But grief is not rational. The silence of those walls was unbearable. David appeared at first like a devoted son, stopping by each day, sometimes with Melissa and Chloe, bringing groceries, offering comfort. One evening, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped low and David leaned in with concern etched across his face. "Mom, you should not be rattling around this big house alone. It is not healthy." Melissa added her sympathetic nods, reinforcing his words. The suggestion came naturally. Let them move in temporarily. Let Chloe stay in her school district. Let me downsize to a smaller apartment, just until I figured out the long-term plan. They called it temporary. They made it sound like love. I believed them. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. 6 months later, they were fully installed, their belongings spilling into every corner while I lived in a rented one-bedroom across town. They paid no mortgage, no property taxes, no maintenance, because it was all still in my name. Yet I was the one shrinking into the background of my own story. 3 years stretched out, each month with a new excuse. A shaky job, a supposed pregnancy, Chloe's transition to middle school. My home slowly transformed into theirs. The wallpaper Tom and I had chosen painted over, my possessions reduced to clutter and packed away. The house was not the only thing vanishing, I was disappearing too. My presence became an intrusion, my voice a disruption, and somehow I convinced myself it was love, that I was helping, that sacrifice was noble. Looking back now, I see it for what it was. Systematic erasure. That night in the hospital lobby, the bitterness tasted sharp but clean. I had played the fool long enough. Barbara did not waste words when I explained. She was eager, almost triumphant, that I had finally come to my senses. She promised discretion, promised to bring in her friend Patricia, an attorney who specialized in family property disputes. Smart woman, Barbara said. And for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of strength return. But even her reassurance could not drown out the sound of Melissa's caption replaying in my head. Finally, a day without the drama queen. They thought they had won. They thought they had silenced me. They had no idea who I could become when stripped of illusions. As the taxi carried me back to my cramped apartment, I stared out at the dark streets, the passing glow of street lamps smearing across the window like ghosts of every compromise I had made. I thought about Tom, about how he had trusted that I would be cared for after he was gone. I thought about the promises David had made, the sympathetic tilt of Melissa's head, the way Chloe's laughter once filled the house with warmth. And I thought about how it had all been a performance, an orchestrated takeover disguised as family devotion. The truth burned in my chest hotter than the heart palpitations. It was betrayal with a smile, treachery wrapped in hugs and grocery bags, and it was going to end. By the time I turned the key to my apartment door, the decision was already carved into stone. My house would no longer be their stage. My name would no longer be their mask. They had mistaken kindness for weakness, but weakness had a limit and mine had been reached. The sale of the house was not just a transaction. It was the first strike in a battle they never saw coming. The morning after I made that call to Barbara, I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of strong coffee, waiting for her to arrive. The apartment smelled faintly of burnt toast, though I had not eaten. My nerves were too raw, my mind too loud. I could not stop replaying Melissa's words online, that smug caption, the mocking approval of relatives, the growing sense that my erasure was not accidental but deliberate. When the knock came, sharp and punctual, I straightened my shoulders. Barbara entered briskly, carrying a folder under one arm, and with her came another woman, Patricia Morgan. Patricia's eyes were quick, sharp, and calculating. She had the air of someone who had seen too many family betrayals disguised as domestic disputes. They spread documents across my tiny table as if it were a war map. Patricia wasted no time. "Before we begin," she said firmly, "I need to know the exact arrangement. Did you sign a lease with your son? Were there rent payments?" My answer was simple, but devastating. No. It was just family helping family. She exchanged a look with Barbara. Her expression was both sympathetic and grim. "That is good news and bad news," Patricia explained. "Good, because you still have full ownership rights. Bad, because after 3 years of continuous occupancy, they may try to claim tenant protections. In some cases, they might even argue adverse possession. That could complicate eviction." The words tasted bitter. Ownership was not supposed to be questioned when it was my husband and I who had poured decades of sacrifice into that home. Patricia's voice was calm but unflinching. "We will need to be very careful. They will fight this, and you should be prepared for a legal battle." I nodded, though inside I was trembling. I had thought selling the house would be simple, a quick strike. But there was no such thing as simple when family betrayal had metastasized into something far more deliberate. Barbara opened her folder, her nails tapping the paper as she slid documents toward me. "There is something else," she said. I checked the tax records. Several liens were filed and released over the past 18 months. "Did you know about these?" The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. My stomach lurched. "What kind of liens?" I asked. "Home improvement loans," she replied. "All documented, all paid off, but the pattern is suspicious. It suggests borrowing against the property's equity." My pulse quickened. "I never authorized any loans." Patricia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "When was the last time you checked your credit report?" Shame flushed through me. "I cannot remember. Maybe 2 years ago." Patricia's tone sharpened. "We need to pull it immediately. If they have been intercepting your mail, there could be financial activity you know nothing about." The room spun slightly as I realized the scope of what might be happening. For years I had trusted that the pile of letters, bills, and official notices was being handled. I had believed that their concern was genuine, that they wanted to lighten my burden. but the truth was crawling out from beneath the surface, and it was uglier than I ever could have imagined. Barbara's lips pressed into a thin line as she packed up her papers. "Selling the house," she said, "might end up being the least of your worries." That night I barely slept. Every sound from the street outside my window felt like a warning. Every flicker of shadow a reminder that the ground beneath my life was shifting. When dawn broke, I found myself staring at the ceiling, thinking about the years I had given, the trust I had offered, the sacrifices I had made in the name of family. And for what? To be erased in plain sight, replaced in my own home, stripped of dignity, and perhaps of more than dignity. By the time my phone rang at 7:23 a.m., my chest was already tight with dread. David's name lit up the screen, relentless, insistent. I let it go to voicemail. His voice poured through the speaker, equal parts command and disbelief. "Mom, we need to talk. Some crazy woman called saying she is our listing agent. Obviously there has been a mistake. Call me back immediately." A mistake, as if my decision to reclaim my life could be nothing but an error in his eyes. Before the message even ended, the phone rang again. "Melissa." This time I answered. Her voice was sharp, shrill, the edge of panic barely contained. "Eleanor, what the hell is going on? Some real estate agent called David. She said she is our listing agent. This has to be some kind of scam." I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the silence stretch. "Actually," I said evenly, "Barbara Henderson is my agent. She has been in business for 30 years. I would hardly call her a scammer." The silence that followed was thick, pulsing. Melissa's tone climbed. "Your agent? What are you talking about? You do not own the house anymore." I laughed, but without humor. Living there does not mean owning it. The deed is still in my name. It always has been. I could hear David's voice now, raised from somewhere near Melissa, their words spilling over each other. "Mom, this is insane. You cannot just sell our home out from under us." Our home. The phrase hit me like a slap. It had stopped being our home the moment they celebrated my absence. My voice did not waver. It stopped being our home when you called me a drama queen on social media while I lay in an emergency room. Melissa sputtered. "That was not about you." "Of course it was not," I said, just like forgetting my birthday was not about me. Just like not answering my calls was not about me. But the truth was darker than birthday neglect or missed calls. Patricia's preliminary findings had revealed something I could no longer ignore. "David," I said, my voice steady but cold, "we need to have a serious conversation about finances. Today." The line went quiet. His voice returned, hesitant, wary. "What kind of conversation?" I did not flinch. "The kind where you explain the $75,000 loan taken out in my name 6 months ago." Silence. The kind of silence that confirmed everything. After I hung up, I opened a notebook and began to write. Not a grocery list, not errands, but a record. Every slight, every dismissal, every time I had been made to feel like a burden. February. I asked David to help me move furniture. He said he was busy, then posted photos from a ski trip the same weekend. January. I stood in the back of Chloe's school play because Melissa had forgotten to save me a seat, while strangers filled empty chairs. December. I brought gifts for everyone on Christmas morning, and they handed me a clearance candle with the sticker still attached. The pages filled quickly, each line proof of my erasure, each memory a brick in the wall they had built to shut me out. But as I wrote, something shifted. For the first time in years, I saw the pattern clearly. This was not random neglect. It was calculated, deliberate, a strategy to make me small, to make me invisible. They had stolen not just my home but my narrative. And now, armed with evidence, I would take it back. The credit report was not a list of numbers. It was a confession. When Patricia laid it out in front of me, each line item was like a blade, cutting away the illusions I had clung to for 3 years. The home equity loan was not a small repair loan, as I had once dared to hope. It was $75,000 siphoned off under my name, and that was only the beginning. There were 3 credit cards I had never opened, each with staggering limits, each with balances that reflected a life of indulgence. There was a personal loan for $30,000, store cards, gas cards, even an account at a jewelry store. Every one of them tied to my old address, every one of them tied to David's phone number. The charges told the story of a family living well beyond their means, except the family was not mine. Melissa's yoga studio membership, David's personal trainer, Chloe's tennis lessons, lessons she never once mentioned to me, Hundreds spent on restaurants I had never dined in, thousands on clothing I had never seen, vacations to places I had never visited. The Mexico trip alone cost $8,000, spent while I sat in my apartment at Christmas, convincing myself they were just keeping things low-key. And then the most recent wound, a jewelry purchase of over $3,000, charged on the day I was lying on a gurney with chest pains. While my heart faltered, David was buying luxury. I printed the statements until the stack was thick and heavy in my hands. Each page was proof that I had been financing their lifestyle without consent, without knowledge, without even the courtesy of acknowledgement. I thought of Tom, of the trust he had placed in David to look after me, of the way I had believed his concern after the funeral was genuine. The betrayal was not just personal, it was generational. It was the theft of my husband's legacy, the destruction of what we had built together across decades of sacrifice. The more Patricia revealed, the colder my blood ran. She showed me not just the charges but the inquiries, attorneys, financial institutions, something called elder care assessment services. They were not only stealing, they were preparing to argue that I was incompetent, incapable, unfit. They had been building a case while I was distracted by grief, gathering evidence to lock me out of my own life legally. It was not enough for them to take my money. They wanted my power. They wanted control of me, of my decisions, of every last thread of independence I had left. It was a textbook strategy of elder abuse, Patricia said. Isolation, financial exploitation, then guardianship. The words pressed against my chest until I could hardly breathe. I was not just a victim of theft. I was the target of a long game, a systematic dismantling of my autonomy. It explained everything: the redirected mail, the casual dismissals, the constant narrative that I was fragile, dramatic, unstable. They had been scripting me as incompetent while smiling to my face, and the worst part was that I had played along, shrinking myself, doubting my instincts, believing their reassurances. I had handed them the brush and let them paint me out of the picture. That morning, the phone rang again. David's voice filled my voicemail, brittle with false authority. "Mom, we need to talk. You cannot do this. You cannot sell the house. Call me back immediately." I let it sit. When Melissa called, I finally answered. Her voice was sharp, brittle, the edge of panic cutting through her composure. "This has to stop," she snapped. "This house is ours. We have lived here for 3 years. We have invested in it. You cannot just take it away." I let her words hang in the air before answering, calm and deliberate. "Living there is not owning it. The deed is mine. It always has been." For the first time, there was silence on the other end. Not indignation, not anger, but the dawning recognition that I was no longer pliable. David's voice joined hers, muffled but audible. "Mom, this is insane. You are going to ruin everything. We are family." The irony cut deeper than any insult. Family. The same family that had celebrated my absence, the same family that had taken my identity and turned it into their bank account. I spoke with a clarity that startled even me. "It stopped being family when you posted about how peaceful life was without me. It stopped being family when you stole $75,000 under my name," Melissa gasped. "You have no idea what you are talking about." But I did. And for once, I was not afraid to say it. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table, the folder of evidence spread out before me. I picked up my pen and began writing in my notebook. Not just the financial betrayals, but the smaller ones, the ones that chipped away at my dignity day after day. The ski trip that coincided with my request for help. The forgotten birthday acknowledged 2 days late on social media. The school play where I stood at the back like a stranger. The clearance candle handed to me on Christmas morning. The notebook filled quickly, each entry a reminder that this had never been about love or care. It had always been about what they could take, about how little they valued me once Tom was gone. As I wrote, I realized that every insult, every slight, every theft had been building to this moment. They had underestimated me, mistaking kindness for blindness, sacrifice for surrender. They thought they could script me as incompetent, erase my voice, and inherit not just my house but my very life. But they had miscalculated. I was not weak. I was not fragile. I was not their victim anymore. I was ready to fight, and I had evidence sharp enough to cut through every lie they had told. By the time the sun set, I had a folder full of proof, a notebook full of memories, and a fire inside me that no caption, no staged family photo, no smug smile could extinguish. They had called me a drama queen, but the truth was this. The drama had always been theirs, and now it was my turn to tell the story. The confrontation began not in a courtroom but in the stillness of my apartment, with the phone pressed against my ear and the voices of David and Melissa spilling into the room like an uninvited storm. Their fury was not about betrayal, not about guilt or shame. It was about control slipping through their fingers. They had built their lives on the assumption that I would remain compliant, that I would continue to believe their version of reality, and now the walls of that illusion were crumbling. Melissa's voice rose first, sharp and desperate. "You cannot do this to us. This house is ours. We have lived here. We have invested in it. We made it a home." I let her words echo, then answered with deliberate calm. "The deed is mine. It always has been. You may have filled the rooms, but ownership never passed to you." David's voice cut in, indignant. "Mom, you are ruining everything. We are family. Family does not throw each other out." I felt the bitterness rise in my throat. Family does not abandon one another in hospitals. Family does not celebrate absence as if it were a gift. You chose your narrative, and now you can live with it. For a long moment, there was silence on their end. I could almost hear their carefully constructed world wobbling on its axis. When Melissa spoke again, her voice was thinner, less certain. "But we have maintained the place. We painted, we fixed things, we paid for improvements." I did not hesitate. "With money you stole from me, with loans taken in my name, with credit I never authorized." The silence that followed was not ignorance. It was recognition. They knew I had discovered the truth. The next move was not theirs, but mine. I contacted Patricia again, and she did not waste words. "You must act quickly," she said. "If they are preparing a guardianship petition, you cannot wait. We file criminal charges now." Her voice was a steady blade cutting through my panic. The very thought of pressing charges against my own son should have torn me apart, but instead it steeled me. For years they had eroded my dignity. Filing charges was not cruelty. It was survival. By noon, the papers were in motion. Identity theft, credit fraud, forgery. Words that carried the weight of felonies, words that turned David and Melissa from family into defendants. The sound of the police officer's pen scratching across the complaint was both devastating and liberating. Every letter written was a severing of ties, but it was also a reclamation of my life. That afternoon, a knock rattled my apartment door. When I opened it, Chloe stood there, clutching a suitcase nearly as large as she was. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "Grandma, please do not make us homeless," she sobbed. "Mom says we will have to live in the car. She says you do not want us to be happy anymore." My heart cracked, but I recognized the manipulation as clearly as if Melissa herself had whispered it in my ear. Chloe was being used as a weapon, a 12-year-old shield for her parents' crimes. I pulled her inside and sat her gently on the couch. "Did your parents send you here alone?" She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. My anger flared. They had driven her here, parked outside, and pushed her forward to beg on their behalf. I chose my words carefully, steadying my voice so as not to burden Chloe with the full truth all at once. "Sweetheart, you are not going to be homeless. I promise you that. But there are things you need to know. Your parents have not been honest. They have used my name to take money for things that were never about you." Her brow furrowed in confusion, but Dad said he cannot afford another house because of his job. I looked into her wide eyes and said quietly, "Then he should not have spent $8,000 on a trip to Mexico last Christmas." Her gasp was sharp, her face pale. "We did not go to Mexico. They said they had to help sick relatives, and I stayed with Sarah's family." The truth burned through me like acid. They had abandoned their daughter at Christmas to vacation on stolen money. When I walked Chloe downstairs later, her small hand clinging to mine, the car was waiting. David leaned out the window, his voice clipped. "Well, did you talk sense into her?" I leaned down to meet his eyes, my voice as cold as steel. "If you ever use your daughter against me again, I will add child endangerment to the list of charges I filed this morning." His face drained of color. "What charges?" Melissa leaned across him, her voice shrill. "We have not stolen anything. That money went to family needs." I laughed, but it was a sound without joy. Tennis lessons Chloe never took. Vacations she never joined. Jewelry you bought while I was in the hospital. Call it what you want, but the law calls it theft. I opened the back door and helped Chloe out. "She is coming with me," I said, "until you learn what it means to be parents." The car horn blared as they shouted after me, but I did not look back. Chloe clutched my arm, and together we walked away from the wreckage of their lies. In the weeks that followed, Patricia's office became a battlefield headquarters. Legal documents covered every surface. Associates pored over bank statements, and investigators traced the fraudulent accounts. What they uncovered was worse than I had imagined. The paper trail went back nearly 4 years, starting with the mail redirection after Tom's funeral. It was not random theft. It was premeditated strategy. They had used my grief as camouflage, turning tragedy into opportunity. Patricia's investigator even discovered irregularities in the past, a history with David's elderly Aunt Margaret, whose accounts had mysteriously drained before her death. It was not their first scheme. It was a pattern. One evening, Nancy called me. Her voice was careful, hesitant. "Eleanor, David has been telling people you have had some kind of breakdown. He says you are confused, paranoid, making things up out of grief." My throat tightened, but I was not surprised. They had been preparing this narrative for months, convincing relatives that I was unstable, laying the groundwork for guardianship. "Nancy," I said, "I have every document, every forged signature, every bank statement. This is not paranoia. This is proof." Her voice cracked with guilt. "I should have spoken sooner. I saw the way they talked about you, made you seem like a burden. I believed it because it was easier." Their web of deception had stretched far, but it was unraveling. The law was on my side now, and for the first time in years, so was my own voice. I was no longer the grieving widow who needed managing. I was the woman who had drawn a line, and on the other side of that line, their empire of lies was collapsing. The further Patricia and her team dug, the darker the truth became. What I had once believed was a single betrayal grew into a revelation of a pattern, a calculated way of living built on the backs of vulnerable relatives. When Patricia laid the documents on the table, I felt my stomach twist. It was not only me they had deceived. Before me there had been Margaret, David's elderly aunt. She had died at 84, leaving her house to a church instead of to David. The church lawyers had quietly discovered discrepancies in her financial records, accounts drained, funds missing, but with her health in decline, no one had pressed charges. The family had chosen to bury the suspicions with her. Now, the pattern was impossible to deny. David and Melissa had rehearsed their script long before they turned their attention to me. Patricia explained it with a grim efficiency. "This is not an isolated crime. It is a modus operandi. They identify a vulnerable family member, gain trust, control access to finances, redirect mail, then build a narrative of incompetence. Once the groundwork is laid, they move toward legal authority, guardianship, conservatorship, power of attorney." Her words chilled me more than any hospital diagnosis could. This was not just about money. This was about erasing entire people while wearing the mask of caretakers. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Wells, Melissa's estranged sister, called me one evening with urgency in her voice. She had seen the news of the charges and wanted to tell me something. Her words tumbled out quickly, shaky with both guilt and anger. "This is not the first time Melissa has done this. She did it to our grandmother. Grandma Rose was 82, sharp as ever, with savings and a house. Melissa moved in after a minor fall, claiming to help. Within a year, she had power of attorney. 2 years later, Grandma was in a nursing home, her accounts empty, the house gone. The money was never traced." I sat frozen as Jennifer continued. "I should have warned you. I should have said something when David married her. But I convinced myself I was imagining it. I was wrong. The revelation made me sick. What had happened to me was not an accident, not a tragedy of grief exploited once. It was the continuation of a hunting pattern, a predator moving from one elder to the next. Jennifer promised to provide sworn testimony and even had financial documents from her grandmother's estate that might support the case. When I hung up, the silence in my apartment was deafening. It struck me then. I had not stumbled into betrayal. I had been targeted. The following days blurred into a whirl of legal meetings and strategy sessions. Patricia showed me inquiries on my credit report from multiple law offices, firms specializing in elder law and guardianship. The pieces fit together with terrifying precision. They had been preparing to strip me not only of assets but of personhood, to have me declared incompetent. Every social media post about my absence, every whispered comment about me being fragile, every missed invitation had been part of a campaign. It was not neglect, it was framing. They were building a story where I was no longer fit to live on my own. A story they could present in court as fact. The manipulation extended far beyond finances. Nancy, my sister-in-law, admitted she had often heard them describe me at gatherings as paranoid, confused, unable to manage simple responsibilities. Others in the family had accepted it as truth because it was easier than questioning. Now I realized how deeply they had cultivated this narrative. They were not only stealing from me but rewriting me. When Patricia presented the possibility of an emergency custody hearing for Chloe, I felt both fear and resolve collide inside me. Chloe's tearful visit had revealed the cruelty of her parents more clearly than any bank statement. They had abandoned her at Christmas while lying about sick relatives. They had used her as a pawn, sending her to beg on their behalf. And now, with evidence of neglect and financial crime, Patricia was confident the court would side with me. If we can demonstrate abandonment and manipulation, she said, we will secure temporary custody. Chloe, sitting quietly beside me, looked up with a seriousness beyond her years. Grandma, I do not want to go back there. Not until they stop lying. Her words became the final strike of truth. She was not confused. She was not manipulated into silence. She saw it all, and she chose me. In the midst of legal filings, Barbara finalized the sale of the house. Within weeks, she had found cash buyers willing to meet asking price. The closing process moved swiftly, as if the house itself was eager to shed the darkness that had filled its rooms. The day I signed the final papers, I stood in the empty living room one last time. The walls echoed with decades of memories, but also with the hollow laughter of recent years, laughter that had excluded me. Chloe ran her hand along the faded markings where her height had once been recorded. It feels different without furniture, she said softly. Everything looks different without lies filling it up, I answered. She smiled faintly, and I knew she understood. The check Barbara handed me was heavy in my hands. $400,000 minus closing costs, freedom in the form of paper and ink. It was not just financial security, it was a severing of chains. That house had been turned into a cage by people who were supposed to love me. Selling it was not loss, it was liberation. Yet liberation came with consequences. The phone calls multiplied. David and Melissa trying every angle, every number. The messages shifted from rage to pleading, from denial to twisted justifications. We did this for you. We only wanted to keep the family together. You are overreacting. But every word only proved their desperation, their refusal to face the truth. I stopped answering. I blocked their numbers. For the first time in years, their voices no longer had a hold on me. But as Patricia warned, the fight was not over. The district attorney's office had taken up the case, investigating not only the fraud but the potential for elder abuse charges. Investigators traced accounts, documented forged signatures, and followed the trail back to Margaret and even to Rose. Each revelation painted a picture darker than the last. It was no longer just my fight. It was about exposing a pattern, about ensuring no one else would be caught in the same trap. When I looked at Chloe across the table one evening, her eyes steady and determined, I realized something else. This was no longer just about reclaiming what was stolen. It was about showing her that lies do not win forever, that betrayal does not go unchallenged. She deserved to know that truth, no matter how painful. She deserved to see that even when family turns into predators, you do not have to accept the role of prey. The legal battles stretched over months, each day peeling away another layer of deception. Patricia's office became my second home, the walls lined with folders stacked high. Every page an indictment of the life David and Melissa had built on lies. The district attorney's team called it one of the most systematic cases of financial elder abuse they had ever seen. Forensic accountants traced every forged signature, every fraudulent withdrawal, every purchase masquerading as household necessity. Each discovery was a nail in the coffin of the narrative they had constructed. The story of me as a fragile, confused widow who could not manage her affairs. That fiction crumbled in the face of documented truth. The conservatorship petition they had prepared was discovered on their home computer, dated months earlier, ready to file at the moment they believed I would be most isolated. Draft statements from neighbors describing me as disoriented, photographs of me looking tired at family events, even recordings of phone calls where I had stumbled over words in grief. All of it was evidence they had planned to twist into proof of incompetence. It was chilling to realize how thoroughly they had plotted to erase me not just from my house but from my legal identity. The detective who uncovered the files told me bluntly, they were preparing to take your life away in every sense except the biological. The court hearings revealed more than I had anticipated. Investigators confirmed not only the theft from me but from Margaret, whose accounts showed withdrawals eerily similar to mine in her final years. The estate of Margaret pressed forward with a claim, and the church that had inherited her house joined the investigation, demanding answers for the missing funds. And then there was Jennifer's testimony about their grandmother Rose, a story that reached back even further. Patterns emerged so clearly that no one could dismiss them as coincidence. Melissa had perfected her method long before she married David, and together they had become predators in the guise of caretakers. When the day came to stand before the judge, Patricia guided me through every step. Chloe sat beside me, small but resolute, her presence a silent testimony of her parents' neglect. The judge listened as evidence of abandonment poured out. The Christmas she had spent with a friend's family while her parents vacationed in Mexico, the weekends she had been left behind while they traveled, the staged narratives online portraying me as unstable. By the end of that hearing, Chloe was placed in my custody permanently. Her eyes shone with relief as she gripped my hand, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The sale of the Maple Street house closed 3 weeks later. Standing in the empty space for the last time, I let the memories wash over me. Decades of laughter with Tom, birthdays, holidays, the smell of Sunday dinners. But those memories had been poisoned by betrayal, by the 3 years of being treated as an intruder in the life I had built. Chloe walked beside me, running her fingers along the walls, whispering, "It feels lighter now." And she was right. The rooms were empty of furniture, but also empty of lies. Barbara handed me the check, and in that moment, I understood freedom in a way I never had before. The sentencing of David and Melissa came months later. David, confronted with undeniable evidence, pleaded guilty to identity theft, fraud, and elder abuse. He received 2 years in prison and was ordered to pay restitution, a total of $127,000 once all the fraudulent accounts were traced. Melissa's defense painted her as a follower, someone who acted under David's influence. She received 18 months of community service, though Jennifer's testimony made her complicity clear to everyone in the courtroom. Justice did not erase the wounds, but it confirmed what I had always known in my bones. I had not been dramatic. I had been preyed upon. The restitution process was grueling, requiring the sale of jewelry, the seizure of luxury goods, and garnishment of David's wages in prison. I recovered about 60% of what had been stolen, which Patricia assured me was more than most victims ever saw. But the money mattered less than the truth. For years they had built their narrative on the idea that I was weak, incompetent, and dramatic. Standing in court, armed with evidence, I tore that narrative apart. Every family member who had once laughed at Melissa's captions or believed David's excuses was forced to confront reality. I was not the burden. I was the victim of their calculated fraud. Life did not end with court documents or restitution checks. It began again. Chloe and I moved into a modest house in Asheville, surrounded by trees and hills that seemed to breathe with us. She found friends who welcomed her, a school where she thrived, and a therapist who helped her untangle the lies her parents had woven around her childhood. I volunteered at an elder abuse prevention center, standing before rooms full of strangers to tell my story, to warn them of the signs. I saw in their eyes the same disbelief I had once felt, the same resistance to imagining that betrayal could come from family. But as I told them, predators often wear familiar faces. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it all, if I regret not seeing sooner, if I regret losing my son. The truth is complicated. I regret the years I wasted believing their lies. I regret that it took me collapsing in a hospital to wake up. I regret that Chloe had to be caught in the middle of their schemes. But I do not regret fighting back. I do not regret refusing to be erased. I do not regret standing in the ruins of their story and building a new one of my own. David calls sometimes from prison. His voice is softer now, threaded with pleas. He asks for money for commissary, for help with appeals, for me to convince Chloe to take his calls. I listen, but I do not bend. Some bridges cannot be rebuilt once they are burned to ash. Melissa has tried too, reaching out with messages framed as apologies, though always laced with excuses. I do not respond. Their story no longer includes me, and mine no longer includes them. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Chloe dragged me outside to see the treehouse she was building with the neighbor's grandson. A wooden sign hung above the entrance, painted in bright colors. It read, "Eleanor and Chloe's Clubhouse. No drama queens allowed." She laughed, proud of her creation, and for the first time in years I laughed with her. Not the hollow laughter of appeasement, but the deep, unguarded kind that comes with peace. They had called me dramatic. They had tried to script me out of my own life. But in the end, It was their lies that collapsed under the weight of truth. And standing there with Chloe, under the fading light of a new chapter, I understood the lesson that had cost me so much to learn. Peace is not found in silence. Peace is found in refusing to be erased. There comes a moment in every life when silence is no longer survival but surrender. For 3 years I thought keeping peace meant keeping quiet, that if I endured the cuts and the dismissals long enough, family loyalty would prevail. But betrayal feeds on silence. Manipulation thrives when you doubt your own worth. And love, when twisted into control, becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. What David and Melissa did to me was not a mistake. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a strategy, carefully built on my grief and my trust. They turned the house Tom and I had built into a fortress for their lies. They redirected my mail, erased my presence, and constructed a narrative where I was fragile, unstable, unworthy of control over my own life. They celebrated my absence, mocked my existence, and stole the very foundation of what my husband and I had worked for. But the truth does not stay buried forever. Every fraudulent account, every forged signature, every staged photograph became evidence of a deeper reality. I was not the drama queen. I was their victim. And when I chose to fight, I reclaimed not only my house but my dignity. Filing charges, selling the house, securing custody of Chloe, these were not acts of vengeance. They were acts of survival, of resistance, of refusing to be erased. Chloe's presence reminded me why I had to keep going. She had been manipulated, abandoned, used as a pawn in games she never asked to play. Yet when given the choice, she chose truth. She chose me. Watching her build a new life free from lies has been the greatest proof that fighting back was not just about me. It was about breaking a cycle, about showing her that love is not measured in stolen vacations or expensive jewelry, but in honesty, in safety, in trust. Today, I live in a home that is not haunted by betrayal. I volunteer to help others recognize the warning signs, to remind them that abuse often hides behind smiles and family dinners. And I speak because silence nearly destroyed me. If my story reaches even one person who is doubting their instincts, who is being told they are dramatic, who is being made to feel small in their own family, then everything I endured has meaning. To those listening now, do not let anyone rewrite your story. Do not let them convince you that your pain is exaggeration or your truth is inconvenience. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Real peace is found when you refuse to be silenced, when you claim your voice and your worth no matter who tries to take it from you. If my voice resonated with you, if you see reflections of your own story in mine, I invite you to stand with me. Subscribe to Silent Lies. Share your story in the comments. Let us build a space where truth is louder than betrayal, where silence is broken, and where no one has to face the darkness alone.